Sir, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. How you doing, Rob?
Dude, I'm so excited to talk to you. And I was telling Steven this on the phone earlier. I said, I'm so excited to talk to him. I've talked to him like, I think 3 times in my whole life. I don't feel like I know him at all, but I feel like I've been seeing you for a
I
very long
definitely
time.
I feel the exact same way about you because I know we
Great.
met at school. I do not remember a single interaction we had at school,
Nope.
but I've known who
Nothing.
you are. I've known of you, and I see you all over social media. I've listened to At the Elephants. Like I'm very aware. And the first conversation with you I remember was this past year at homecoming.
Yeah, the one we just had in the fall of 2023.
Right, like 3 months ago, if that.
Bananas. So how okay, well then I'm gonna start. I'm gonna get to my stock question in a second, but let me start with this. When did you actually start at School of the Arts?
I started in 2008 for the VA program.
I okay. So I moved to Winston-Salem. It's not when I started school,
Mhm.
but I moved to Winston-Salem in May of 2008.
Wild.
So
That's
that's
wild.
where the crossover started. We were both hanging out on that campus beginning around the exact same time. Which I didn't even
Yep.
realize because I was around there for like too long, like kind of had a
Hmm.
weird, almost semi Van Wilder relationship with the school where I couldn't leave. And it was a lot. So I always wonder when I think of people like you, I'm like, where in that 7 years were you? Because who, and I have to then know, like, were high school program or was it college or was it both or was it, it's like a mystery. So for you, it was like you and I both landed in Winston at the same time, at least as far as the school
Hmm.
is concerned.
Yeah. So I had family in Winston growing up, but I grew up. Well, you're gonna ask me about this in a minute, but
You're really
um,
sweet to give me room to make sure I don't not ask it. So,
yeah,
where are you from, brother?
I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. Grew
Hell
up just a
yes.
couple and a half hours away from Winston, but I
In the
have family in
mountains.
Winston in the mountains. Yes, so I would always come to Winston over the summers to visit that family. So I was always familiar with it, even though I didn't officially move to Winston until 2008.
Okay, so all right, then my sentence clears. We both got there at the same time. It
Indeed.
is all right, so let's start with the where are you from? You're in Asheville. Let's hang out there
Mhm.
for a second before we get to the school ship, because of course I'm interested in the fact that we were there at like the same time and I didn't know it. But I will
Right.
pause on that. I'll get to that act two in a second. Act one, we're in Asheville. You were born there?
Yeah, born and raised. Lived the first 16 years of my life there.
How far back does the family go in that area? They live there for a long time, or did they move? A lot of people move right like when they have a kid or right before they have a kid. Are they from there?
Right before they had me. Yeah, they I'm pretty sure my mom was pregnant when the two of them moved to Asheville.
Where are they from?
So my mom's from all over, but my dad grew up in Winston, and the two of them met in Winston.
Okay, so some
So my mom's
serious
originally
Winston
from the
roots over here.
Northeast.
Got
Hmm.
it.
Oh yeah. Winston runs deep, for sure.
So I think it's pretty. I don't know, man. It is hard to imagine from what little I even know about you. It is hard to imagine you separate from the concept of art. Like I feel like you just I don't know if you know you're accomplishing this, but as a vibe, and I mean this since I started seeing you, I guess in 2008 or whenever it happened. I don't know how much that would have happened, but whatever. We'll get to that. You have always looked like an artsy fella the whole time
I
I've known
appreciate
you.
that.
I mean that, and I mean it as obviously as a compliment. How far back does that part of your identity go, and in what way does it show up initially?
Um, Literally before my memory starts. So
Cool.
like there are like pictures of me as a toddler, like painting, finger painting, holding like crayons in my fist and scribbling on paper. Like I have always been very visually expressive. Um, and I think a big part of that is both of my parents were artists. So I
Hmm.
grew up around that in general, and that was
What
fostered from a
kind of
really young
artists
age.
were your parents?
So my dad was a painter and a sign maker by trade when I was growing up, and my mother plays multiple instruments and was a music teacher when I was growing up.
Okay. I think I can understand music teacher a little quicker. When you say
Mm-hmm.
painter and sign maker by trade, what is Pops doing every day when he leaves for work? Does he own his own business? He works somewhere? Like
Mm-hmm.
what is his sign maker doing?
So he had a shop in the basement of our house, actually.
Oh, fuck
So
yeah. So fully
um,
independent.
yeah, owned his own business. It was called Ampersand Signs,
That's a really good
and
name.
it's a pretty good name, isn't it?
I like that quite a bit,
Um,
actually.
and it runs. It's funny too that it's kind of a family business because my grandmother, his mother, is also a sign maker or was, and so she
Oh,
had
and
a
what
sign shop in
medium are they
her
making these
basement.
signs out of?
So all sorts. A lot of the time, it's going to be either like plexiglass or sheet metal with vinyl applied to it. But
Okay.
then you'll definitely also get signs that are like etched or carved, usually using machinery. But all sorts of different mediums.
No neon?
I don't think they ever worked with neon. No.
Mm, that's a
Yeah, I think
thing
it was
that
a little much.
when I see people offer like custom neon sign, like we'll make you your own neon. I'm like, how the fuck did you learn how to do that? Because I barely understand how those things work. And the idea that you made a custom one and the glass, you blow this glass and then put it in I'm like, it baffles, and I still don't know. And I'm afraid to YouTube it because I think it might overload my brain if I watch somebody try to make a custom neon sign. But I love this very particular artisan thing that you grew up around as a generational.
Mhm.
Was there ever any sign making in your future to be had? Did you ever think that that was going to be a thing you did?
Um, I don't think so. From a very young age, I actually wanted to be a comic book artist. That was what I
Ooh.
was really into. And so I was just constantly like drawing superheroes, coming up with my own characters. I also went through an extended phase when I was like in the single digits where I would make Captain Underpants comics.
Oh, hell
I was
yeah.
obsessed with that as a kid. Yeah.
It's a cool character.
But right, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I definitely was always into comics, and that was the direction I was really interested in artistically before I got to the School of the Arts.
You were
Um,
very much on the comic book mindset all the way up to like going to school.
oh yeah, definitely. Even through school to a certain extent.
Did you graduate high school or did went to the high school program in 2008? What point in it's a 2 year thing, right? VA.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So did you do both or just senior year?
Yeah. So I did both. I did VA one and two, and then I actually went to ECU for a year after that to study illustration, and then ended up back at NCSA the year after that to do set painting.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
So in the high school program, you come in as a junior,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what happens while you're there that takes you out of this comic book thing?
Oh no, I was still in it,
Okay.
which is why I went to ECU to do illustration
Right.
because
That
I
makes
wanted to.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, because I still wanted to do. I still wanted to be a comic book artist at that point in time.
When did that
Um,
change?
so it was something that was like always in the back of my mind, but when I was at ECU, it turned more into like a personal passion thing than a career passion thing. I kind of started to learn what the actual career looked like and realized that it was going to be probably not something that I would enjoy day in and day out,
Mm.
and started looking for alternatives. And ironically, at ECU, learned what scene painting was, even though like I'd been all around it at NCSA. I had no idea, what it really meant. And
What's the
so,
difference between majoring in it at a school like School of the Arts and then really doing it? Like how is that not at all parallel or at least introductory?
sorry, you're talking about scene painting or illustration and like comic books?
Well, you're talking about go back and tell me the point that you were just making so I make sure I'm asking my question right.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, when I was at ECU, I learned what scene painting was. And
Right.
I find that ironic because I'd
Oh,
been
I
all around
see.
it at
That's how
NCSA
I
in high
lost
school.
track of it, because you had already been around School of the Arts, is what you mean, and you'd been on that campus, but you hadn't touched the scene painting part of it. I
Exactly.
understand what you're saying. Okay, I lost track. And it's hard to do because you were there and then there again. So when you say,
Right.
even though I'd been there. Anyway, okay. So the
Right.
scene painting thing that you found at ECU, how did you end up finding that when you were there for illustration? Is that part of the illustration program to be painting sets?
It's not. So ECU at the time, I don't know if they still do, had this really weird rule where everyone who gets an undergraduate degree has to take an arts class. But
Okay.
if you're an art major, none of the actual arts classes count for that credit. So
What?
you have to take, yeah, I don't get it. So you have to take like art history, theater history, music appreciation, like that sort of thing.
Like they just
Um,
don't have enough classes, honestly, for your particular major. They're like, in order for you to technically get this major, you need to take all our art classes that we offer, because
I
that's how it
guess
adds
like
up. That's what it sounds
I
like.
I have no idea. It's weird.
Like if you're there
Nobody
for
understood it.
illustration, you need more like illustration and animation classes and shit.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's so strange.
Okay.
Um, but
But
yeah, so I took the,
it transitions because for whatever reason, I mean, that scene painting thing that you did there seemed to make an impression on you.
yeah, I thought it looked like a lot of fun. I found out that there's an actual viable career as a scene painter. And I think the funniest thing was I was considering switching majors there. And then I looked at the
Right.
textbook they were using, and the intro was written by Howard Jones. And I said, wait a minute. Why do I know this name? Hold on.
Right.
I was just there.
Right.
They'll take me back, right?
Yeah.
And they did.
Man. That's fucking bananas, dude. I had no idea. That's so wild that you're like, oh, I'm at this school. It's pretty good. Let me go try out this other school. And you pop open like the book they're using. That would be like to make the equivalent to like drama if you went somewhere and you were really into their fight choreography program after going to high school at School of the Arts for drama. And then the book, they just hand you Dale Gerard's book. You'd be like, I should probably just go
Right.
back and learn from him. That's so
Exactly.
wild. So so you only spent 1 year, like 2 semesters?
Yep. Yep. That was it.
You finished the year?
I
At
did.
what point in the year did you figure out that you wanted to leave?
Um, I figured that out like at the beginning of the second semester. Um,
And then you
like,
immediately rushed to like go apply?
yeah, because that's when the application period was like coming to a close, I think. Because first semester I took the theater history class and was thinking about switching majors, learned about Howard, and was like, well, this is the time to go. I also didn't really have much of an affinity for ECU. So I was happy to like find a reason to go elsewhere.
What didn't you
While
like about
still,
it? Like what
um,
made it not vibe with you the way that school did, especially when you had like two different experiences?
everyone at the School of the Arts is so passionate about what they're
Mm,
doing. They really care and they really want to hone their craft. And when I was at ECU, I just didn't get that energy. It's very much, it has the reputation of being a party school. And I definitely ran into that. And I'm not really a partier myself. I
right.
care about craft and I care about really like focusing on the education. And so my peers weren't really the same way, even in the art school. I didn't find a lot of peers that had that same mindset. Not to say those people don't exist, because they definitely do. Um,
Why do you think that's
but
important? Like, why do you think it's
because,
important to have those other people? Like, because if you give a shit and the training is good, let's just say, take what you just said for granted, but let's also take for granted the idea that like the training was equal.
it wasn't.
Yeah, but imagine for a second that it was, but at one place you didn't have those other people who gave a shit like you do. Why do you think
Mm-hmm.
that would make a difference? So you'd be like, oh, I got to go to this place because it has more people like me.
Um,
Who cares?
because if there are more people like me, then that kind of affirms the direction I'm going. That gives me, um, like when in moments where I'd maybe do like have less motivation and want to slip away, seeing those people like keeping it up gives me the motivation to keep going.
Mm.
They
You're
push me, I
motivated by
push them.
community.
Community is very important to me. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I mean, those reasons you
Um,
just said, but like, why do you think foundationally? Because for some people, they can kind of go through life lone wolf style and seems to work out okay.
yeah, and it's interesting. I've done a lot of that, and it's ultimately been very unfulfilling.
Hmm.
So I feel like at the time I may not have recognized the impact community had on me. Like I knew it in my gut, but I didn't know it intellectually. I feel like now I know it in both places, and for me, um, really, it just comes down to what does it come down to? Um, that mutual support is really important. The Like I said, like the inspiration where like if you see somebody pushing through something challenging, then that gives you the energy to do it yourself.
Right.
Um,
Were you
it
introverted as a kid?
I was super introverted. Super introverted. I grew up very shy, and my family lived really far away from everything. So growing up, it
Like
was
up
pretty
in the
much just like,
mountains?
yeah, pretty much. So it's
So
pretty
you're
much
like
like
really like a
me and my
mountain kid.
parents.
Yeah. Do you have
Yeah.
siblings?
No, no, a dog.
Solo
That was,
child and the dog.
yep. And two parents
Up
that
in the
worked from home.
mountains, finger painting. They both work from home.
Yeah,
How she's a music teacher, like kids come over and she's like here next to me on the piano and shit.
literally. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So when do you feel like you start to reach outside of yourself and connect with other people more easily? Because you're a pretty friendly guy. You're very easy to talk to.
I appreciate that. It's definitely a learned skill.
Okay.
I would say it started in earnest when I got to high school, because I also went to a really small school that was first through eighth grade. I don't think I was in a class bigger than like 15 people. My eighth grade class was 8 people. And I remember thinking it was really funny, 8 and 8.
Sure.
So, like, very small community. We all knew each other for, the whole time. Right. And so it wasn't until I got to high school, which for me was public high school,
Right.
and really like, oh my God, here are all these people that come from different walks of life. They've had different experiences. They look different. They act different
When
than
you
each
were
other.
younger, did your parents have any like, do you go to church or did you go to any community events or like, did your parents take you around other people or they just kind of kept you in like that dude in powder, just underneath the house, a secret?
I have I haven't seen Powder, but I can say my parents were pretty introverted, which is part of where I got it from.
Got it. So you're like
Um,
all three just kind of like inward people up in the mountains in a nest.
yeah, very much so. And
Interesting.
so it's something that makes me question, like, am I
The
introverted
family
or
of
is it my introversion
owls.
a learned trait? Right.
Right. Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
I do
Well,
love
and why
people.
wouldn't you question that? Because you have no way of knowing. Like,
Right.
and is there a difference really? Or are any of us genetically introverted? I mean, I think it's all environmental one way or another, but
That's true.
I think it's interesting to me when people are introduced to community and how that develops as far as their relationship. A lot of times too, it's a sibling thing. Very, very
Hmm.
common to have one introverted sibling and one extroverted sibling. That's like super common. One of them they both drive each other in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Um, the one who's like outward and fun is kind of like, come on, loosen up. And the one who's like inward is like, you're too loud. It's I think it's an interesting thing that when you run into it. So if you're running into it when you're like 14
Hmm. Yeah.
and then you do 2 years at a public high school that was pretty big
Yeah, it was.
for you.
It was Asheville High School, which I think is the biggest public high school in Asheville.
Okay, well, yeah, there you go. And then you go to school of the arts smaller, but you got all these college kids roaming around in the same campus. So
Hmm.
overall, you got like 2,500 people. It's at least
Hmm.
sizable. Um, how many people go to ECU?
Oh, it blows NCSA out of the water. I couldn't even begin to. I
Just
couldn't
like
even begin
tens
to
of
guess.
thousands of people. right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like
I had ballpark it, but I actually have no idea. I would imagine it's a great deal larger.
yeah,
So
oh, it's
you
definitely
feel like
larger.
that was part of it too at all? Like you were like, this is like big and there's you kind of get lost in the sea of it and you're like, it felt a little more intimate at School of the Arts, like you actually knew who people were and shit.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point you made. That was definitely a big part of it. It was easier to make strong connections at NCSA than at ECU, and
Like
I
you were
had made
still
a lot of
new
strong
to
connections.
learning that skill set. You were still
Hmm.
new to figuring out like how to connect with people and make friends that are more than just classmates, like, and
Hmm.
other relationships, whatever you're dealing with at the time as a teenager. I would
Hmm.
totally be like, I mean, I went to different schools. I went to a school that was smaller than NCSA. That was my first one.
Oh
It was
yeah.
like a community college in the middle of nowhere. And it was very much like all the people from Texas public high schools that liked to just like do the plays and then get drunk. It was like all those people who didn't go to class and skipped and like were, fucking off all the time. All of
Hmm.
those people went to this community college in the middle of nowhere that basically had a feel free to come here and do the same fucking thing for 2 more years, associates program. And I kind of liked the size. I
Yeah.
like it small, man. I mean, I also was not a public, private school teacher from 2014 to 2016, and it
Yeah.
was a private school for kids with like learning disabilities. So all the class sizes were really small. The biggest classes were like 12 kids.
Hmm.
I really think that should be the standard. Like
Yeah.
if it gets, but if you're going to educate public school amounts of kids, you're going to have like a shitload of teachers and a lot of class space to have 15 kids in a class.
That's
Um,
true. And they don't really these days. It's wild. Class sizes are getting bigger and teachers
oh, they're
are
like 40.
getting,
When I was a
yeah,
kid,
it's insane.
25 to 30 was pretty common.
Yeah.
When I was like in
That would be
elementary
too big for
school.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
That would
would
have been way too
agree.
big for me.
But the class sizes now are 35, 40 for sure. They're
Yeah.
huge, especially in the inner cities, gigantic. Okay, so you kind of go super small, little big,
Hmm.
little medium, and then you go big, big, and you're like, back to medium.
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, I'm
Yep.
totally with you. I like the same thing. Uh, so you did 4 years then, or did your
Hmm.
ECU help you out at all? Nothing, right?
ECU got me out of some like
Some
academic
academics.
classes and foundational classes. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, that being said, I still like every semester like filled up
Right.
my schedule with academics and elective arts classes. I really enjoyed getting into that kind of stuff. I think I took probably every philosophy class that NCSA had and every Dean Wilcox class
He's the
that
best.
that he taught. Oh, I love Dean.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was also in the Humans vs Zombies thing that we were talking about before. We like
that does
made
not
him a
surprise me.
character. Yeah, General Wilcox was
I
awesome.
love that. I love that.
Um, yeah, dude. Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of these pieces are kind of coming together. I feel like if you've been listening to this show, then you're way ahead of me. But now I'm kind of catching up for us, like knowing each other. Um, so you're doing the scene painting thing for 4 years at school. You did
Hmm.
two before, so you did six total. Plus, you
Yeah.
have the 7th year that you did at ECU. So that's a
Hmm.
lot of years of arts education you got under your belt. You are a highly educated artist, I would say, in comparison to like all the artists. You know what I mean? 7 years is a lot of time to have formal study.
That's true. Actually, that definitely is true. I hadn't really thought about that. To be perfectly honest, I thought
I
about them
mean,
all as being very separate experiences, but yeah, they were all formal arts
but
education.
it's all formal arts training, like for real, because the high school program, that VA program with like Pam and Will and stuff, they were there at the time,
Yep.
right? And they don't fuck
Hmm.
around. They're seriously good teachers. And
Yeah.
Howard and like all the other people that you work with in DMP when you're in that program is like super cool. Um,
Yeah.
and then, yeah, you stuck out the whole year. So at ECU, so it's 7 years. When you leave, School of the Arts. Are
Mhm.
you still like remembering anything about illustration that's interesting now that you're about to leave again? Is there any waffle or pendulum back to that in any way? Or is it fully like, I can't wait to go beyond this gigantic project with a huge paycheck as a scene painter? Or
There's
neither?
definitely there's definitely some waffling going on.
Okay.
Throughout my entire time in college at NCSA, whenever I would finish class, I would go home and I would do personal illustration. I would teach myself digital art. I taught myself Photoshop. I just like really got into that realm. Just in my personal world, I couldn't let go of it. And not that I like wanted to, I just like gravitated towards it. Right. And I kind of felt this conflict while I was at school because it's very different than scene painting, which is the direction I want my career to go, which is what, what I'm being taught, what I'm putting all this money and time and effort into. And so I kind of start to like hide that illustration side a little bit, because I don't want my teachers to think I'm not serious.
Right.
But literally the week before graduation, there's like, you always have your final meeting with your main teacher, right?
Right.
And so Howard, I will never forget this. We start in his office. He says, "Let's go outside." So we go out and onto the landing by DNP. He lights up a cigarette and he looks
Yes.
at me and he says, "Ivan, you should be a concept artist."
Mm.
And I just like, I felt seen and I felt validated, and I was shocked that, because I tried really hard to like keep that from him, but I know in hindsight it was super obvious to everybody. But like in me, I was just like trying to like keep that separate so that people would think I was serious about my education. So it
That
was a
is a
really interesting moment.
very that is a very interesting quality that I want to talk about.
Mm.
So I was in DMP. Did you know that?
Yes, yeah, and then you went into directing, right?
Yeah, and then I went to drama. I was in
Yeah.
lighting first. So I took
Okay.
my whole first year where I took Will's classes and Pam's classes. Like I know all of that curriculum
Hmm.
for the first year. And obviously I ended up somewhere else. Obviously I
Right.
ended up at in a different department, not just a different department, a different school on campus entirely. So
Hmm.
um I dealt with a tremendous amount of kind of weird criticism and teachers
Mm.
being weird and accusing me of stuff and all this kind of weird drama politics shit because they knew I was directing a play in the drama
Hmm.
school my freshman year.
Okay.
I have made the argument that the point of the school is to educate the students and send them on the best path, knowing that we're young and that path may snake a little bit. It may change. It may be like, oh shit, I know about this. Especially when you put all
Hmm.
the shit on the same block and we can see that shit over there that we've never seen before. And oh, a film school. I didn't grow up with a film school in my life. I didn't know that was
Hmm.
there. Like getting that exposure makes it such an interesting experiment. And I think also as a paying customer, which is what you are as a student at a university, being like, oh, I think my education is better found over there, should not be
Hmm.
met with anything other than like, well, if that's what you think you should do, have a fucking meeting. And
Right.
then if you
Yeah, I
need to
really.
go ahead. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I hear your
Mhm.
thing about like, I'm here to paint sets. I'm a painter. And I don't want
Mhm.
anyone to know that I like to illustrate, which in my amateur mind is like the tiniest splitting of hairs between different shit. And I'm like, you don't even, and I'm
It
curious where the
is.
culture comes from with either you or the school or whatever. But I don't even have to wonder very far because I remember what it was like to get that hit. And that surprised me because I was like, I don't understand why they're upset with me. Why are they
Hmm.
accusing me of this? Why is this happening? And you know who pointed it out to me was fucking Pam.
Really?
Pam Griffin pulled me aside. We had a whole conversation. I remember out in the hallway, and it
Hmm.
was nuanced. There was a bunch of layers to it, but one of them was like, they feel like you don't respect the opportunity of getting that education that you were accepted into. And I
Hmm.
was like, yeah, but I'm paying for it. It's not a
Hmm.
gift. And
Hmm.
like we were very much on the same page. She was explaining to me like almost like, buddy, right here, easy to understand, not complicated.
Hmm.
Because I was acting all like I don't get it, I don't understand. And she was like, it's very simple. And then she laid out a few other things that also made sense that I won't repeat. But it was like,
Sure.
and I still to this day I hold the same thing, which is like I don't understand why you, and I want an answer to this, why you have to feel the pressure to not reveal every nuance and flavor of your artistry to your teachers who are teaching you how to be an artist. Why should you have to hide
Hmm.
any of that shit? Why can't you just be like, and you know what? I've been thinking about 3D printing too. How the fuck do they do that? When can we do that? Like, but you can't because you're not a real scenic painter if you're not dedicated to a life of 80 years in the business of painting scenes. It's weird.
It is. It
What do you
definitely
think,
is.
Ivan?
I think it's a mixture of things because idealistically, I agree with you. Like, you're a paying customer, you're going to this place to learn to be an artist, and you're exposed to a lot of things you're not exposed to before. So, of course, you're going to get interested in something else, and maybe you want to go do something else, or maybe that just informs what you're already doing. So, idealistically, I'm totally on the same page. But that was not my experience of the culture. Wasn't yours either, it sounds like. And
Right. But do you think it
I think
came
in
from
it,
them or us, or did we all just kind of were equally guilty for making everybody feel that way?
I would definitely say it came from both because I had a great deal of imposter syndrome at the time.
Mm,
And so I already felt like an imposter in the scene painting program, even though I was a good student. And that wasn't because of anything anybody told me. That was just my own insecurity and my own knowledge that, like, oh, I actually have this other, passion over here to the side. Right. And
right.
so it was definitely a mixture of that culture because I'd seen that happen to other people transferring between programs and then like people talking behind their back
Right.
or all sorts of things like that. And so I would definitely say it's a mix.
There's a lot of
But
that, man. I think that's one of the biggest things I've started to find out on this show after years of doing it and kind of changing the way we're having these conversations is there's a big leap for a lot of people to jump on this school and say they
mhm,
this happened and I want to make it very clear as I head down this road because I do think it's an important conversation um, that any I am not referencing any documented lawsuits or complaints about verbal or physical abuse or anything like that. I am setting
mhm,
that aside as I talk about other people's experiences, not those people's experiences. Um,
sure.
I do that to make the distinction of there are a lot of people who simply left the school feeling like they were asked too much of me. It was unfair. They should have
Mhm,
not have pushed me to this point. Um, and I think there's a lot of conversations to be had about that. I mean, as if, as if it wasn't the culture would be like a blatant denial of fact.
mhm,
But I always wonder, where does the line fall with responsibility about that culture? Because how much of the institution is pushing it, how much of the student body is thriving on it in a weird, gross way. And then
mhm,
how much is the institution responding or not responding to that dynamic, which is the next
mhm,
layer. And how much responsibility do any of these groups in these moments have to do something differently? This is the nuance that I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about because it's a lot easier to be like, it was a toxic hellhole or it was the
mhm.
greatest place I've ever gone to school because that conversation is quicker. Um, but I do believe it
Yeah.
lies somewhere in between. Because I definitely know there are a lot of us, I say us just to include myself only, that the parts of that school in DMP and drama that I
Hmm.
experienced that pushed me really hard, I am tremendously grateful for.
Hmm.
But I ain't everybody. Everybody's coming from a different place and has different experiences. And I very much accept that mine's kind of overwhelmingly positive on the spectrum.
Sure. This is definitely a topic I've given a lot of thought to, because I definitely know a lot of people who have serious trauma coming out of the school.
Yeah, me too.
I
There's a
definitely
lot of them,
recognize.
man. There's a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
them.
definitely. And as time passed, I realized that I was also one of those people in ways that I didn't realize that affected me into adulthood.
Mm,
Um, and so this is definitely something that's been on my mind, especially as time passes. But what I've come to is I realized that there are two extremes in teachers. Not every teacher falls into one of these extremes, but they're two extremes.
right. Too like a
And
dichotomy.
right. And so they're the teachers that have a lot of clout for really pushing students, really being hard, really getting results, and results.
Sure, whatever
And
that means.
exactly. And they're the ones that often are very mean and cause a lot of trauma and drive students away, but also get some students to push well beyond where they would otherwise. I
We
also
think about
find
J.K. Simmons and Whiplash.
another reference I'm not familiar with.
I'm gonna no
Man,
for anyone else listening. It's a film about conservatory and the whole. It's the full end of the spectrum of like the monster teacher, but he's doing it
sure.
because he wants to press diamonds out of these kids. Right? That's the argument
Right. And that's definitely an archetype that exists at the School of the Arts.
for sure.
I would say on the other end of the spectrum, and for this end of the spectrum, I will name some names, are the teachers who are genuinely like kind and
Mm,
through positive encouragement foster growth. I'm talking about like Howard Jones, Kyle Webster, Dean Wilcox, right? Like people like this. They're the people who really taught me the most and who I grew the most as a result of studying under.
right.
And none of them ever were cruel. None of them ever yelled. None of them, I mean,
Right.
aside from like to make a point
Yeah, of
about something, like
course.
they never yelled at a student, right?
Right.
Or at. And so these are all people that really were encouraging and kind and taught through example, right? And focused on the growth of the individual. And for me personally, they got better results than the teachers who instilled fear and trauma and all that sort of stuff. And so my opinion is that you don't need to have any of that. You don't need to be the person that traumatizes a student to get good results out of them. I feel like there has been this culture in the art world for like incredibly long time that you have to be traumatized to be a good artist, and I think that's bullshit.
I
Um,
agree.
and I think teachers like that are the proof because they get amazing results, absolutely amazing results, and they leave the kids feeling better than when they walked in. They leave the kids feeling more excited and encouraged and self assured than some of those other teachers.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mostly, I think you're right. I don't think. Well, I'll be specific so it doesn't sound like I'm disputing anything. I'm not. I'm definitely
Mhm.
not disputing the idea that you do not have to traumatize someone to make them a good artist. Absolutely not.
Mhm.
But I want to also make sure that when we talk about these different teachers, because I mean, I think there are only so many examples of what you're talking about that are like, well, what we're calling like traumatizing teachers. I think there's only so
Mhm.
many examples of those that are fully in that neighborhood of even the students who can take it being like, this shouldn't happen this way. And
Mhm.
those people we just shouldn't have teaching kids. Like, if even the
Mhm.
kids who aren't traumatized by it are sitting in the room being like, damn, like, this is not okay. Let's just not
Mhm.
have those people teach children or adults or anybody else until they get their shit together and they're not fucking people up. Like, that's bad news. I'm not pro that. I've never been pro that. I do think, however, people have different constitutions. I think that
Mhm.
people have different levels of insecurity, and I think that we are talking about a lot of times, especially in your case of starting when you did, like 15-year-old kids. And if you're
Mhm.
just talking college, there's still like 17-year-olds that are in these classes. Like, they're young people.
Mhm.
Young people are often more sensitive. Artists are always more sensitive. So I think that's an element, but it's like it's easier conversation for me if I look at it through this lens.
Mhm.
It's probably not worth the success drawn from the tough love
Mhm.
when the consequence, through nobody's fault, is also a fair amount of negative trauma.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because
I agree with that.
I don't want to dismiss the fact that some of those hard ass drill sergeant teachers work well with some students. Like, there are plenty of students that take that class and don't walk away traumatized. They may not be as educated as well as they would have if they had been in Howard's class. I agree with that. But they
Mhm.
don't walk away being like, I didn't learn anything from there and they just fucked me up. Every student can't leave that teacher's class feeling that way, or honestly, they wouldn't work there for that fucking long. There has to be some of both happening so that anyone in charge of anything, unless it's their fucking nephew, has a reason at the faculty meeting to be like, well, there's all these other kids that are saying they're taking your class and they like it, or they're having, they appreciate the feedback, or you're critical and they approve of that, whatever. But I absolutely agree with, and this is where the conversation kind of ends. It's not worth the kid who has to go to therapy for like 5 years because of his ballet teacher.
Right.
Like, so four kids had a good time in the class and look back being like, she was a hard ass, man, but I liked her. She was cool. Okay. But that's not that valuable. Like, we don't have to
Mhm.
keep that at the expense of the chick who's crying every night because of the way she was treated in there and smacked with the ruler or whatever fucking thing that most people didn't notice, but definitely happened. Like, it's not worth that. I
Mhm.
don't want a program for myself as a young person. When I look back, I had a lot of really great, kind, patient teachers. I also had a few hard asses. In my
Mhm.
personal experience of when I was there and my personal experience of those hard ass teachers, we had a good relationship. They were a little hard on me. I needed it sometimes. Other times I was a little bit leaving the class like, man, fuck them, but not like, oh my God. It just didn't hit me that way. If they were overly mean to me or aggressive, I also went to school a little bit older than some of my classmates. So to
Mhm.
me, it was like, if it's helpful, I took it. Otherwise, it was a grain of salt. If people were kind of rude in a class, I'm like, it's just some lady. It's just some guy being like, like, whatever. Like, to
I
me,
think it's
I just
good.
didn't take it to heart too seriously. But again, that experience is not worth anyone they fucking destroyed.
Right. I think you're very fortunate in that you were able to have that separation. Um,
Right.
and you are able not to tie your self worth to the approval of these teachers and take everything they say
Correct.
as gospel. A lot of
Right.
people aren't that way.
And I think
I would
it's a
also say,
relationship of a fallout of the nature of the school and how it works. And so then the kids are kind of doing it, but did the institution do it to them in the first place? This is my question.
mhm, it's a good question. Yeah.
Right.
Nature, nurture, chicken, egg, right?
Yeah.
Um, but Something interesting you said as well a second ago is you talked about the students who really thrived in that under those tough love, hard ass teachers,
Right.
and had a good relationship and all of that. Even if they would like sometimes go home and like still feel bad, right? But
Sure.
they still like their work thrived, right?
Right.
Um, I've I feel like I was one of those students when I was at the school, and it wasn't until years later that I
Mm,
realized that I still shouldn't have been treated that way, and that
mm,
my peers shouldn't have been treated that way. And it impacted in many ways my relationship with art and changed how I thought of myself and how I viewed myself. There are a lot of like, there would be a lot of things, a lot of comments that teachers said to me in an effort to help me grow, ostensibly, that years down the line, when I would be making art, would show up in my mind as self-criticism. Like I would hear the voice of these
mm.
teachers talking to me as like a 25, 28, 30-year old, right?
So much
And
power they have over you in that moment.
exactly. And so that sticks with you for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I was just trying to be a good student. I was just trying to get through. I was trying to do what I had to do to be a successful artist. And these were the people telling me what it was that I had to do.
Right.
And then as an adult, it really hit me like a lot of this damaged me. A lot of this pulled me away from being what I think a good artist is. A lot of
Mm,
this also, to be fair, did push me in directions towards being a good artist, but had the
right.
psychological toll that lasted into my adulthood. And I'm still working through, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say that in the moment, you can be there and you can think like, I'm okay with these hard ass teachers and I'm thriving, but there can still be fallout from that decade or
Sure.
more
You could be
later.
wrong.
Yeah,
You could be wrong
exactly.
about it, which is what I'm
Right.
getting
And I
from that. And
was.
I think, yeah, and I'm getting that from your story. And it totally makes sense to me because, again, you're also young as fuck. What do you know?
Right.
You just don't
Right. These
know.
are
And it's
children.
okay not to know. I was older, but I was still like 22. I wasn't like an old person. Like, and I just so happen to be fortunate enough that even though I'm a sensitive person, I'm an artist and all of those things, I'm also one of those like kind of resilient, forget the insults, remember the compliments kind of person. And that is not
Mm-hmm.
most young artists, honestly. It just isn't. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind. One of the things that I've argued on the show as well is what is the ethical responsibility alongside an institution taking so much money from young people
Mm-hmm.
to teach them how to do something? Um, I mean, a much bigger conversation starts after that period. But to
Mm-hmm.
be more narrow, when you know all of these kids are sensitive,
Mm-hmm.
they all are. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've said it recently on the show, but one of my favorite definitions of uh, art is highly sensitive people reporting back to the rest of the group what life is like for them.
I love that.
Isn't
That's
that
good.
great? It's Pete
Yeah.
Holmes, great comedian, really, really brilliant guy. Um, and I think that that's true. I think it's inherent in people who go out of their way to create art, and it's because they're being affected more strongly by things. And that's not a good or
Mm-hmm.
bad quality. It just is a quality. Some people go through
Mm-hmm.
life being like, "Man, can you believe the fucking sky?" And other people are like, "It's the sky." And no one's right or wrong. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
They're just different people, but highly sensitive people have a tendency to go out of their way to go back to the rest of the group and be like, I've tried to remake the sky because it so overwhelmed me that it was XYZ. I was like, I wonder if I could make it. Could I make those same colors happen on this thing? I tried, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone else is like, I never even would have thought to fucking try to do that. Who cares? But cool. But I really like that you made it and I love it. Can we keep it in the house? Like,
Right.
that's the relationship. So, all these kids are sensitive and
Mm-hmm.
they're kids. They're almost everyone on campus is under 25 years old. Almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what is your ethical responsibility to endeavor to overstimulate them? Because let's be honest, that's half of what art education is. We need to take your sense of what you think a color is, or a feeling is, or a sound is, and push it all the way this way and all the way that way, so you get an idea of what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
We got to move all these sliders around. So we're going to kind of fuck with these kids a little bit, and they're highly sensitive. And we're going to charge them hundreds of thousands of dollars to do it.
Mm-hmm.
What is your ethical responsibility in return? Like, what do you also owe them? And the more I'm hearing it, I'm like, psychological pre-screening before you admit them. How about that? Let's make sure that they don't need serious help before you push all these sliders around, because they might already need serious fucking help. I'm not saying don't teach them, but no, they're going into a drama class where they're going to pretend crazy shit happened to them. And they may, are you aware that they're untreated for like bipolar disorder? Because that might affect their classmates that day.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought about
Research
that
worth
actually. That's an
doing, in my
interesting.
opinion. You got to do it to join
Yeah.
the military, man, because they're
Mm-hmm.
like, not saying you're necessarily going to get kicked out because of this, but we're going to screen you because we want to know. We put you under these extreme circumstances. What is your situation? Like, we deserve to know that. And it's your right to know too. And so I think the school should do that. That's my opinion. I also
Mm-hmm.
think, and I don't know what their relationship is now to like counseling, but man, therapy,
Oh yeah.
like, almost mandatory, like borderline. Occasionally, we want you to sit down and talk to someone who is a serious professional and just check the fuck in. Just make sure
I think
you're
that would be a
cool,
really good
dude.
idea,
Yeah.
honestly.
Because we've been
You
moving these
know,
sliders around a lot, and your work is great, but that's not the only thing you are. You're not
right.
just that work you made. You're a person, and we want to make sure you're fucking good.
Mm-hmm.
You highly
Mm-hmm.
sensitive kid.
You know, it's interesting. That's not the only thing you are. I always, like my whole life, like I said, I was making art since I was like before I have memory.
Right?
Um, I've always considered myself an artist as a core part of my identity. And
Right.
the last 2 years, this is like finally in December came to an end. But for the last 2 years, I went through very, very extreme burnout. I made almost nothing. And it forced me for the first time in my life to look at who I am without art as a like core part of my identity. And I
How
think
did
that did
that
me a lot
feel?
of good. It felt great. It's nice to have art as like a one aspect of, you know, the multitude that is Ivan. But it took till 2930 for me to actually like approach that or even consider it, right? And so I definitely think that's something that would be really helpful at the school, especially considering how seriously they take the education and how intense the culture around that is, right? I feel like in probably both of our cases, because you know you were in DNP and then you know we're also directing, and I was scene painting and also illustrating on the side. If if we were taught that that wasn't part of our identity, I feel like it would have been way easier, not just for us to own those parts of ourselves, but also for the people around us to accept that they were parts of us.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like that would be a huge boon for the entire student body. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm all for that. There's some way to be like, who are you not as an artist? What are your other interests? What are your other passions? Um, and the ironic thing about that too, I think, is that's just going to make your art better, right? Um, Even though you're like separating yourself from this idea of being an artist, from this identity, having those other experiences, having that multitude can really inform what you do creatively.
Absolutely. And I think it's naive to think that conservatory training would work the way that it used to, because the world used to move slowly enough that if you learned something that everyone was doing 40 years ago, it would still apply.
Hmm.
Like that's how
Hmm.
things were for a long time. It was like, oh, well, a few things have changed. The lights are actual bulbs now. But other than that, we're pretty much doing the same fucking thing. And,
Hmm.
if you learn how to do it, you can come do it with us. And now that changes like every 5 to 7 years so dramatically, so radically in every one of our fields that it's
Hmm.
about what we all talked about in every class, I think, freshman year. It's about building a toolbox of skills. That's what it's
Hmm.
about. It's not about identity. It doesn't have to be
Hmm.
you. It doesn't have to be your life. It doesn't have to be your heart and your soul and your back. Like you can have all that and it's your prerogative. You're also allowed to like be a son or a daughter or a mom or own
Hmm.
a cupcake store or do whatever the
Hmm.
fuck you want with your very full life because this life is full of all sorts of cool shit. And the idea of
Yeah.
limiting yourself to being like, with every breath, I must make these paintings. Like, bro, okay, for a little while, have a phase. Jackson Pollock yourself in an attic for a while and sling it around. Cool. But like eventually, go outside, take a
Hmm.
breath. And I think that idea, I think it's hard to do with young people because when you're younger, you're so all or nothing. You can be all green light, red light. But it really, that's, I think, the lesson if you can teach it, which is like that nuance of there's nothing wrong with going so hard to make sure that you can draft this thing really fucking fast and
Hmm.
do whatever we think you can do within a reasonable amount of time to get really fucking good at drafting it really fucking fast. That is a cool thing to learn how to do and a useful thing. But also, like that's all it is. It's all it is. It's just drafting.
Hmm.
And it's very unlikely that you're ever going to get picked out of a crowd as the very best, fastest drafter and made a millionaire and given all your wildest dreams come true. It's just going to be this thing you know how to do.
What a nice fantasy.
I know, right? Can you imagine? It paid
Right.
off. Finally,
Right.
every dream come true because I got good at that one thing that I thought was everything when I was 19 years old.
Right. Don't tell them about AutoCAD.
Yeah, no, don't tell them about it. It's only been around for
Right.
50 years, but don't tell them it's happening. Um, yeah, no, I think that that's the point, dude. I think you got to check in with people. I know we're running out of
Hmm.
time. You've got to leave in just a few minutes. I
Hmm.
mentioned to you before, and I'll tell our guests, I want to have you back really soon because you had kind of a tight window today. So did I. And I want to talk to you more because I want to talk about this whole AI thing. And I feel like we could talk
Yeah.
about it for like a full second episode.
Probably. Probably.
So
It's definitely something
I
I'm
have
passionate
so
about.
many
I got,
thoughts about it. Me too. I'm so interested in
yeah.
it. And I feel like we have like opinions that are very close to each other, but also I
Hmm.
have so many questions for you about what I think your take on it might be. And they're not even
Okay.
criticisms, they're just curiosities.
Yeah.
And so I
I'd love to have
invite
that conversation.
everybody. Yeah, I think it would be great. I invite everybody to come back and check out Ivan's second episode. A lot of times, the second episodes for people get less views because people are like, oh, I heard him the first time. But I'm telling
Hmm.
you, it's a completely different thing. We're not just going to expand on his childhood or something. Where I want to go on this AI and how it affects art. And if you listen to this podcast, which is only so many fucking people, but if you're listening to this podcast, this concerns you, goddammit. Every single one of you, I'm telling you, it concerns
It really
everybody,
does.
but it really does concern every artist in every medium.
Hmm.
Um, and I really think that you are also a very well read person on it who knows what you're talking about. So when we get together, it won't be totally amateur. We'll do a little research and then we'll chat it up. But thanks for talking to me, dude. I really appreciate it. This was super fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Really excited that we got to have this talk, and I look forward to part two.
It's gonna be fun, dude. Ivan, thank you. Is there anything you want to plug? Anything people should go check out, or your socials, or anything like that you want to push?
Yeah, it hasn't been updated in a minute, but it's coming back. Check out neon.fever.dreams.inc on Instagram.
Okay.
That's where you can find my
Oh, I
art.
have. I
That's
subscribe to that.
yeah. So go look for that, and there you can see all sorts of wild sci-fi paintings that I do. And yeah, I
Hell
would say
yeah.
that's my main plug. It used to be something I did professionally. Now I do it just for me, and that's a really good feeling.
Awesome. I love that, man. All right. You take care. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Have a good one.